Hello everybody, peace of the Lord, brothers and sisters. My name is Misael, and welcome to another video in our series of English fluency for speaking better English in church. Before we get started, please feel free to leave suggestions for topics or other questions in the comments. Those greatly help to help me come up with other things to say because I run out very quickly. This video is geared more towards those of you who translate, because I think that a lot of the times before we start speaking in English, whether it's preaching or simply presiding over services in English, a lot of us start translating first. So if you're starting to translate, or if you or somebody you know translates from Spanish to English in church, I think that this video could help. The very first thing I want to bring up, and it might be very natural now for many of you who've been translating for a long time, but take opportunities of repetition to further explain or clarify what you're saying when translating. So the brother who's speaking in Spanish, who's speaking during the prayer service, they tend to repeat themselves. Either they rearrange the sentence they're saying or the expression they're using, the phrase, they rearrange it and then say it again, or they oftentimes just repeat the expression or the phrase. Don't feel obligated to repeat as well or to rearrange your sentence and say it again, but try to better explain what you're saying, either give more context or just find a better way of wording what you've been saying so that you make sense to whoever you're translating. Remember that the person listening to the translation doesn't see your expressions and they don't see your hand gestures or anything like that. So it might be more difficult for them to understand or grasp what you're saying if you don't give context. So if the brother who's speaking in Spanish is repeating himself a lot, then take that as an opportunity to clarify or better explain yourself. Point number 2, I can't stress enough the importance of the context of the words being used in Spanish when you're translating. So if you use Google Translate or any translating service like that, you'll note that sometimes the words that they give you are direct translations, but they don't apply in the same context as they do in Spanish. So an example of this is Libertinaje. And this is somebody a brother asked about some time back. The translated word for libertinaje is debauchery, but debauchery is a much more aggressive word in English to say somebody is living sinfully or in sin. So I would use lawlessness, simply living without law in their life, without any order in their life. So again, the Google Translate word is debauchery, which in certain contexts is the right and most appropriate word to use, but oftentimes lawlessness fits a little bit better, even though it's not immediately what comes up when you enter it into a translating service. Another word like this could be inventar. So in Spanish, inventar is used when, like, if you're trying to inventar excusas. In English, you wouldn't say invent excuses. You would say come up with or make up excuses. So see, the word inventar translates to invent, but it doesn't apply in many contexts. You would be better off using come up with or make up. And then kind of not as much, but also desear, deseo. It's translated as desire, but depending on the context, it could a better fit could be to long for something, and a synonym for that would be to yearn for something, to really want something. So desear can be to desire, or if it's a stronger feeling, to long for something. And then when it comes to virtues, for example, el temor de Dios. In Spanish, we kind of have a very good workaround where if we're talking about el temor de Dios, we just say temor. And if we're talking about fear, we say miedo. And that's kind of a very clear way to distinguish which one you're talking about. But in English, this doesn't work as well because there's either fear or afraid. and they kind of both mean the same thing. So if you're talking about the virtue, even if in Spanish they're using temor to kind of as a shorthand for the entire virtue, in English you always want to use the fear of the Lord. So as an example, debemos ser temerosos. You wouldn't in English say we must be fearful. You should say we must have the fear of the Lord, or we must act according to the fear of the Lord. Because again, it's not as common of an expression to simply say fear or fearful. These are suggestions. These are suggestions, of course. If the people you're talking to know exactly what you mean, then by all means use what they know. Another one that I wanted to bring up is tiempos, because I've translated this as times, but I feel like a better fit for the span that we're describing in Spanish would be ages. So for example, en estos tiempos, en este tiempo, instead of saying in these times, a common expression to describe this in English is in this day and age, or nowadays, which is one word. Nowadays, or in this day and age, to describe estos tiempos. So also, una obra in Spanish, we refer to a small church without a full-time pastor a lot of the times. In English, this would be a mission or a small congregation. Obreros are missionaries. They could be laborers, but if you say laborers, that kind of refers to somebody with a manual job that they have. So you can use it. But it is uncommon. If you're talking about brothers and sisters who work as missionaries, you'd be better off saying missionaries. You'd probably be better understood. Again, it's just a suggestion. If the people you're talking to know what you mean by laborers, or if you've explained it to them, feel free to use it by all means. I have heard, though, a lot of the time, brothers and sisters speaking in English, all of a sudden dropping the word obra in there, and obreros. So I've heard, oh yeah, the brothers are in the obra. I wouldn't use that. I would strongly advise not to use that. In English, to plant the church is what in Spanish we would refer to as levantar obra. It's kind of a difficult one if you've never heard it before, because in Spanish we use levantar obra a lot to say that the church is going to begin in a place where it's not yet present. But in English, this idea or concept is called planting the church. And then, I know this video is running a little bit long, so I just want to leave you with this. Autoconsumo. So this word in Spanish describes the act of the church kind of working within itself to help itself, to where it won't depend on any outside sources. But if a brother, for example, produces something, that the church itself will buy that product, and then the money will stay in circulation. So there is no English word for this. There's no English translation for this. Now, I've heard it translated, and I don't know that I've heard a good translation for it. What I've used in the past when talking about this is self-sustaining. It kind of describes a similar concept in English, but I want to ask anybody who listens or who watches these videos, what would you use for autoconsumo? And I'd be happy to have a discussion about it in the comments. I'd be happy to come up with something, because I don't know that it's been officially translated or that this concept has been officially established in English. So, brothers and sisters, if you have ideas or suggestions, please let me know. Also, if you have ideas and suggestions for anything else, please let me know. I think that's it for now. Till next time, God bless you.